I once worked for a place where every day it seemed like someone new was being fired. It was overwhelming, and I kept wondering to myself, am I going to be the next one fired here? That's what got me interested in this idea of coworker termination and how we communicate to remaining employees that their coworker is dismissed. Today, I'm going to talk about some background information and then talk about my master's thesis research. Then I'll describe some recommendations for how we can better communicate that a coworker has been terminated. Let's start with some background information. Ending employment is an innate part of the organizational experience, and research has examined a lot about the terminated employee's perspective and the person that sends the message that they're being fired, but not a whole lot about the employees that remain and how we communicate with them and how they experience their coworkers' termination. There is some work on survivors who experience the downsizing of their organization and who aren't downsized themselves. Often we find they experience some distrust of management and have some feelings of information deprivation and job insecurity. But there's not a whole lot on just regular terminations and firing. And I think poor communication could negatively impact individuals, work units, and the organization and produce uncertainty, tensions, and otherwise negative feelings as a result of a coworker termination. So in my master's thesis, I studied the experiences of employees who remained at an organization after their coworker was dismissed. And I was interested in questions about how employees learn that their coworker was dismissed and how they seek information about their coworker's dismissal. I was also interested in the predictors of their information-seeking behaviors and predictors of their uncertainty, as well as predictors of feeling social costs associated with information seeking. And social costs is basically how costly socially we find it to ask questions to people. So do we think people are going to look negatively on us, or will our relationship be harmed if we ask questions? So I was curious, what kinds of things predict information seeking, uncertainty, and social costs of information seeking? So I surveyed 220 participants who had experienced the dismissal of a coworker, and I used quantitative methods in this survey, which means I asked a lot of closed-ended questions where people responded using a scale, sometimes as far from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And I also asked some open-ended questions about how they learned about their coworkers' dismissal, what kind of information that they gained. So then I conducted a content analysis on the open-ended questions, some different statistical methods like repeated measures ANOVA, as well as some hierarchical regressions. So those regressions allow us to predict things with our statistics. So how did remaining employees learn that their coworker was dismissed? Well, most commonly, they learned about the coworker's dismissal from another coworker, so in 42% of the cases. In 30% of the cases, they learned from their immediate supervisor. 16% of cases were other, which was sometimes human resources, and in 12% of cases, the remaining employee learned from the coworker who was dismissed themselves. Most commonly, these conversations occurred face-to-face, about 72%, and the other 28% were other channels like email, phone, messaging. When they learned about their coworker's dismissal, usually occurred within the day that the firing occurred in 73% of cases. And then another 22% of cases occurred within a week. Not very many people were learning about their coworker's dismissal beyond a week. And then I was interested, how formal were these conversations that they learned about their coworker's dismissal? And the statistics revealed that the conversations were slightly more informal than a neutral conversation. Let's move on to what predicted more social costs related to information seeking, so asking questions about the coworker's dismissal. Older age and learning via a non-face-to-face channel predicted more social costs, just like they predicted more uncertainty. But two new variables that weren't statistically significant for uncertainty were statistically significant for social costs of information seeking, and those were having less workplace interactions in the workplace with that dismissed coworker and having more out of workplace interactions with that dismissed coworker. So what that means is if you don't interact so much with that coworker at work, you feel like there's more social costs to ask questions about the dismissal and how to handle things. And if you have a closer relationship with them outside of work, you have more interactions outside of work, then you also feel like there's more social costs of asking questions and seeking information after that coworker's dismissal within the workplace. Based on the results of my thesis, I provided some recommendations for communicating with remaining coworkers. The first thing I recommended is that managers be aware of the grapevine. So most of those remaining employees were experiencing learning about the dismissal of their coworker from another coworker, from the dismissed coworker themselves, or from somewhere else. It wasn't as often that immediate supervisor or human resources. Also, given the results of what I found, communicating via a face-to-face channel, communicating sooner, and communicating more formally can help employees have lower uncertainty and lower social costs of asking information. So it kind of makes sense if you learn about a coworker's dismissal via email. It's hard to ask follow-up questions unless you're explicitly typing in an email. Whereas if it's a face-to-face conversation, those social costs are lower and people feel like they can ask questions. Then we also want to be thinking about what do remaining employees need and want to know as it relates to their dismissed coworker. They probably need to know how to address any duties that are no longer being filled by that coworker. They probably need to know what they should do if someone asks about the coworker dismissal. They probably want to know how soon the position will be filled and what the plan is for that. So managers should step back and put themselves in the remaining employees' shoes and try to think about what would they need and want to know. And then we also want to assess the information needs of specific employees. So I mentioned before that older employees have greater uncertainty and also have greater costs of information seeking. So maybe ensuring with those employees that you've created a space where people feel like they are solid in their job and that they can ask any questions that need to be answered in order for them to move forward knowledgeably and successfully, that could be a good idea. There are some other pieces of advice for communicating a coworker's termination that we should keep in mind. And the first is to just not stay silent. We shouldn't just dismiss someone from the organization and not share that information with people that remain. They don't need to know that that person was fired, but they do need to know they're no longer employed with the organization. We want to communicate quickly and compassionately. It's very possible that the remaining employees built a close relationship with this dismissed person, so we want to acknowledge that they might be having a tough time. We want to keep our message short and to the point and stick to the facts so that we protect the dismissed coworker's privacy and anyone else that was involved in any hairy issues if that's why the person was fired. And then we definitely want to address how workload will change and who will be addressing different responsibilities. Again, to reiterate, we don't want to explicitly say that people were fired. They are just no longer employed with the organization. Here's an example of a sample termination message that could be sent via email after or before a face-to-face conversation with our employees. As of this date and time, this coworker is no longer employed with the organization. We're going to explain the transition plan and who will cover the duties. If you receive any inquiries, internal or external, about the termination, please direct them to this person. Okay, so you've communicated the termination of the coworker. Now what do you do? Here's some advice for after you've communicated that termination. We want to check in regularly with remaining employees, making sure their workload is okay, making sure they're still feeling okay emotionally after the situation. We want to compliment employees on their efforts and on the outcomes that they're producing so that if they're doing a good job, they know about it and they can feel stable in their employment. We also want to then provide constructive feedback to address shortcomings. At the end of the day, we don't want our employees feeling like I felt at the beginning of the video when I told you I felt like I was constantly going to be the next one fired, even though I had no reason to feel that way. So giving compliments, letting people know they're doing a good job, and then providing constructive feedback if they are not doing so great. We also want to distribute tasks with proper compensation and or move quickly to rehire that position when possible. I hope this video helped give you some ideas for how you can better communicate with remaining employees when a coworker is terminated, and I hope you personally don't feel like you're on the chopping block if a coworker is terminated in your workplace.